Instead of trying to fight the system, why don't we embrace the system and build performance around it?
It's much easier to ski downhill, right?
It totally is.
If the organization works a certain way, don't fight it. Hi, I'm Matt Egol, host of the CX and Culture Connection, the podcast for leaders looking to drive impact by focusing on their customer experience and culture together. I'm super excited to be here today with Zach Hamilton. He's the author and creator of the Experience Performance System, and he has a much more colorfully named newsletter.
What's up, Matthew? Glad to be here today.
It's always fun to chat, Zach. I think we're going to have a really fun conversation. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise.
So I have to say, I really enjoyed reading your book. If folks want to check out the review, they can see the link on screen to the book review. I really recommend checking out the book. What really struck me, this book is right for the moment because experience management's going through a lot of changes. We'll talk a lot about that today. But I love the way that you focus on kind of getting away from insights theater, as you call it, and getting more into more of a scalable system.
Yeah, it's, when I really think about, just my time as a CX practitioner, so the book really is derived from, when I was at Aaron's and I got asked to lead customer experience. I remember that conversation, Matthew, where our CEO was like, look, I know we have a platform because I see it on our P&L. I know we get customer feedback, but I've never seen customer feedback. I can't tell you what our scores are. I know we have an NPS. I just don't know if it's very good. And I was thinking to myself, well, it's negative 27 for the company, so it's really not that good. And he said, like, look, I just want transparency into what our customers are saying. And I'll never forget my first executive leadership team meeting that I was invited into, which was about 60 days later. And here I am giving the readout. And I did what every kind of CX professional is trained to do. You show up with your NPS, your CSAT, your trend charts, your text analytics. And I felt really confident going into this meeting that I'm going to be able to deliver what he was asking for. And about 5 minutes in, he just looked at me and said, so what? And I'm thinking, so what? At first, what I wanted to say is, dude, are you having amnesia? Because this is exactly what you asked for. And ultimately what he was thinking about was, okay, this is great, but how does this connect to our P&L? How does this drive business outcomes? And so I think ultimately for the last 20 years, you mentioned it, right? Traditional experience management really taught us how to listen and how to analyze customer feedback, which is great. It's a discipline that we need and a skill set, but it never really taught us how to navigate the internal political system on how action actually happens, and how business outcomes are created. And so the book I wrote was about the system that we built at Aaron's that created $120 million in P&L impact over 5 years, validated by our CFO. And ultimately, it started off with me just leveraging social capital with one internal stakeholder where I created a champion and then we scaled it across the organization. And to your point, I think it's right because you and I caught up at the Medallia Experience Conference. And of course, everything was about outcomes. And I had so many practitioners come up to me and say, look, people just talk about how easy it is to take action and build outcomes or make outcomes, but they don't talk about the how. They don't talk about how to do it. And most of them don't know how to do it because they don't know how to navigate that inner political system.
There's a lot of stuff that we're going to unpack here that resonates from the book from my own experience, and I'm sure it does with a lot of the folks that you've been coaching because you've implemented the experience performance system with dozens of companies even the last year, that we've been talking about. And it'd be great to share some of those reflections with the audience. Can I share a few thoughts that resonate with me from what, like, why this book really stood out?
Yeah, go for it.
And we can dive into them. Okay, so I think we've talked about in this past. One of the things that I was involved in at PwC when I was there up until a few years ago, before I launched JourneySpark, was a body of work we called Return on Experience. And I did this with Sujay Saha. We co-created and wrote a bunch of articles and did a whole body of work there over about a decade. And return on experience was about getting beyond the golden metrics like NPS or CSAT and building a system of metrics that better connected your experience and operational data with outcomes so that you could track outcomes, you could have causal predictors of the outcomes, and you could drive more of an operating model that was more agile to work in pods, to work against driving the right initiatives that drove the outcomes and drove more ownership in the organization. And it was more of an approach to drive change in how the company worked than it was about the measurement itself, although the measurement was key to get buy-in and get movement. But what a few of those things, like reading your book, was like, well, you got a system not only of measurement but of action. You're changing the way the company works. You were working in agile pods, like a lot of the stuff that you're focusing on driving real change in the organization. All the principles of return on experience were here in your book with real world stories of what you were doing. So a lot of it resonated because I was like, this is going in the right direction. It takes real change to make it happen, but you have to approach it systemically. You can't approach it as a measurement challenge or an insights challenge alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was one of the things, at Aaron's at the time, we were probably about 2 years in where our chief technology and product officer had really started to shift us into this, instead of in a waterfall approach organization, into this agile organization, right? And how they develop technology and the way that he wanted product managers and just the cross functional teams to interact with his technology team and the way that they were building and releasing tech. And so we got to that. Ultimately, the organization, what I learned very quickly was if I wanted to get customer friction prioritized, most of it had to do with systems, the way that our systems were architected and built, right? Some of it had to do with policy change, and yes, some of it had to do with frontline behaviors, but most of it was systems. And so I had to learn, one, how to interact with his product teams, um, how they thought about, okay, we sprint every 2 weeks, so they were sprinting every 2 weeks. What prioritization sessions look like, and so ultimately, to your point, we really frame that experience performance system around, okay, here's how our entire organization is essentially working. Instead of trying to fight the system, why don't we embrace the system and build performance around it?
It's much easier to ski downhill, right?
It
So
totally it
if the
totally
organizations works a certain way, don't fight it.
abs-
Unless you're going to change the entire organization, it's much harder to get stuff done that way. Yeah.
well, I thought I was going to at first at Aaron's, and then John Trainer, he was the chief technology officer. He pulled me aside and he's like, Zach, dude, you're bloody brilliant. Why are you fighting the org? Why don't you just embrace it and let's go? And after that conversation, I'm like, he's, he's totally right. Like, what am I doing?
The same thing's true, by the way, with culture.
Yeah.
When people say, like to continue the story, like I worked on return on experience at PwC, and I enjoyed that. But ultimately, what I really enjoyed was change in culture work. So I left to found JourneySpark to focus much more on coaching clients, helping them have their own teams do more of the work themselves and being a change in culture partner versus like the big SAP or Salesforce system implementation. What I really want to do was work on the culture and change management side versus the tech side.
Yeah. And for me, I think I look at culture a little bit differently than I think most people. I think is what's derived from the system that in which your organization works, right? Culture is the output to that. And so for me, yes, everyone has a culture within their organization, but the culture is a byproduct of the system. And so too many organizations have no system in really which the way that they work. each department has a system, and that's why their culture is so fractured and divided.
I think part of why there's so much anxiety in the CX world right now, like Sean Albertson calls it, CX is on the rocks. I had him and a few number of folks on the podcast last year to talk about like why is CX on the rocks. I think we're at an opportunity. I tend to be more of a glass half full than half empty kind of guy. There's tons of change with AI right now, which is building on change before then with data and analytics and technology, big change that the CX professional, and your book really is written for the CX leader as opposed to like the C level. One thing I saw is that the voice of the book was like, clearly the C level will care about your book, and I would encourage them to read it too. But it's written for the leaders to be able to manage up with influence in an organization and influence the C level versus the C level to push it down.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And so these CX leaders are being impacted by AI in their organization. And unless they get in front of these changes and be a champion for the changes, their role's gonna get absorbed into something else.
Yeah, but I think that, and just in what you said itself, is really what's happening, right? There's so many folks that have a CX leader title, but they're not leaders. They're managers. They're managers of dashboards and insights and outputs. And so, yes, you might be a VP of customer experience, but if I were to take a step back, and many of the organizations that I go into and really want to just diagnose like what's happening, I don't see CX leaders, even at the VP level. I see managers who, are managing insights, they're managing dashboards, they're managing readouts, they're managing it, but they're truly not leading. And to your point, that was the shift that I had to make at Aaron's as well, which was, look, I'm a really great CX manager. I had all this, but yet I couldn't create change. I couldn't sell change within the organization. And I think really effective CX leaders, they have to embrace this new identity, right? Because to your point, AI is coming in and it's taking over that management duty for us, right? It's so easy now just to run a regression model in ChatGPT. Let's just be honest. Where the mindset shift has to be, I'm a seller of change within the organization. I'm an influencer. I help frame friction into problem statements, because I don't own the P&L. I don't own a performance metric. I don't own the resource allocation. My cross-functional partners do. So I have to influence them to take action.
My first podcast guest a few years ago was Greg Stewart from the Media and Marketing Alliance. And reason I bring that up is he talked about how experience as a winning strategy is the lead. There's three types of strategies that organizations can have where marketing, is engaged. One is experience as a winning strategy. Another is more commerce as a focus, and a third is brand, like really trying to emphasize your brand. They're not mutually exclusive. The question is where you put the emphasis. And experience as a winning strategy is actually the leading focus for more and more marketing executives who want to influence growth and strategy at their companies. What's happening now, though, if you kind of evolve the movie over the last few years, is AI is raising the stakes for experience as a winning strategy, where much more of the experience will be agentic in marketing, sales, and service. So there's even more change that has to happen to implement experience as a winning strategy.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Right. I think what's happening is, um, I think the economy, just quite frankly, and not just the economy, but really human behavior has really demanded new ways for organizations to deliver on experience. Um, and quite frankly, because we're operating in this traditional experience management model, um, we haven't been able to keep up with human behavior, right? Where listening is very reactive instead of being in the moment. And so I think that's the other piece too, is it's not just AI is setting this new standard. I think human behavior, and how rapidly it changes through a 6-second video on TikTok, right? If you think about the platforms that have, on social media, you have Facebook and Instagram, but what really commands all the attention is those 6-second video streams, right? And so their users are spending more time in the video streams than they are truly looking at updates. And if you think about that and you think about how it's influencing human behavior, well, we need a better approach to the way that we execute and perform for our customers than just listening and having dashboards. And it's going back to your point. I used to say traditional experience management's dead. Um, and we could use the word dead, the term dead. I just think it's served its purpose. And it's time to really like Marie Kondo it, right? Like thank it for helping us learn how to listen and analyze. But now it's time to move into performance. Because quite frankly, that's what our customers are demanding us to do is to perform experience for them.
I don't think it's, I agree with you. Experience management is not dead. I think that there's a lot of what we've learned from design thinking and uh, trying to have great insights and understand journeys. But the challenge is that I'm going to there's several we could highlight, but I think one is the shift from reactively bolting on and listening after the fact versus actually designing the system and orchestrating the journey. I think that's a huge shift in the profession, which the signals you're listening to are much more operational. You're also leveraging AI to mine and develop insights from unstructured data much more. So the combination of unstructured data analytics plus operational data signals means that people who've grown up focusing on surveys and dashboards and things like that are way too reactive, and they're not actually orchestrating the journey. They're just designing, or they're really managing a break fix triage process.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the other signal to operational is behavioral, right? So I think behavioral is probably the strongest one. Operational is number two, or at least that's what I've seen. And to your point, surveys come significantly after the fact, if at all, right? Because survey response rates have dropped tremendously. And so, to your point, it's how do we think about this as a practice differently, or even just a discipline? And I think the other kind of piece it's really impacted the discipline negatively is most CX professionals, to your point, they didn't really know how to build a CX strategy, or design or anything like that. And so ultimately what happened was you had these tech companies that generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, but their product marketing strategy became the CX strategy. One was to sell tech, and then the other one was, okay, well, what do I do with this? And they didn't really know how to implement it. So we have incredible listening tools, but that's it.
Yeah, I think there's, always been a challenge where if you implement technology and the technology becomes the focus, like tech push,
Yeah.
you end up with not a good return on your investment and experience or return on investment in anything. The literature talks about, like 70, 80% of CRM and CDP initiatives don't get the value people expected. You
Yeah.
know, and it's true across many technology implementations. And I often would get pulled in to focus on CX and EX and culture as part of a big tech program, because otherwise you wouldn't get the ROI if you're not now. And I took that a step further and said, you know what, I don't want to make my career just being the CX and culture guy in a tech program.
Yeah.
I want to focus on helping clients. And a lot of the change that's happening now is not the big ERP or Salesforce implementation. It's actually adoption of AI inside the organization and building out agentic systems for how work gets done is more of a change management and organizational culture challenge than it is a big tech implementation.
100%. I think agentic, um, I'm very optimistic about it. Matthew, I know you and I were having this conversation, couple weeks ago. So I'm really optimistic about agentic CX. I've been helping organizations now design and implement agents, not just in the contact center, but beyond throughout the customer journey. And I think, and I've written newsletters about it now, the rise of agentic CX, and then designing the agent.
I've commented on a few of them because they're really good they're really good newsletters, and I wanted people to see them.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And a lot of it's just documenting the process. And so I think what's going to happen though, there's a couple things that I've realized is one, agentic CX is going to completely change fundamentally how organizations work, right? It's going to challenge the power dynamic within the hierarchy, because if you think about business transformation, right? And the whole premise of Agile was to put decisions closest to the customer. And then all of a sudden, you had senior managers and directors who were making executive level decisions, whether they were good or they were bad. But then you had the CEO who was like, well, hold on a second, time out. Those are the decisions that I make. So if you're making those and we're performing, then what's my role? And that's why everything got started to get bloated with governance and steer codes and pilots, right? We were piloting everything because ultimately the CEO wanted to insulate himself or herself, because if one decision went bad and it had a significant negative impact on the company, at least they were insulated from that decision. And so I think that's going to be one of the things that organizations have to really think about with agentic CX. But then the other piece is a lot of CXers think, oh, if I just plug agentic CX into my current strategy, it's going to accelerate kind of like my maturity, if that makes sense. And the only thing it's going to do is really expose the lack of action and decision making. And so when I think about experience performance system, it really is the human led system that's going to bridge traditional experience management to agentic CX. Because ultimately, when you're designing these agents, everything you do from a human led experience performance system, you're codifying it. And now you're turning that into your agent design. And so if you're not doing this, you're not going to be able to design an agent.
The themes you're talking about come up very often in the mastermind groups that I do with Randy and Tamar. Let's run a quick reel on those two groups, and then we'll come back and talk about on the other side. Allow me to briefly interrupt the podcast to share an invitation for you to join one of our mastermind groups. These groups are for leaders building out the CX function at their organization. They are for culture champions looking to develop and sustain behaviors that bring their organization's mission, vision, purpose, and values to life. I'm excited to team with Randy Rothenberg, former CEO of the IAB, on a mastermind group focused on experience as a winning marketing strategy. I'm teaming with Tamar Cohen, who has led CX and EX teams at Zoetis and Travelers, on another group focused on CX EX alignment. Each group meets monthly for 90 minutes. Members receive a coaching hour each month and can attend quarterly workshops. Go to JourneySpark's website for more information. Please DM me on LinkedIn with any questions. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Zach, I've been really enjoying our conversation around how CX is changing in an agentic era. We're both doing a lot of stuff in agentic right now. You've shared with me a lot of the stuff you're doing around agentic, and CX touches marketing, sales, service, operations. It's broad. One of the things that, I've shared with you that I'm involved in is the agenticadvertising.org, helping stand up, Randy Rothenberg and I have been advising agenticadvertising.org AO on the strategy, the member experience, the roadmap, the thought leadership, councils that are getting stood up, and we're going to stay involved there. But the reason I'm so jazzed about it is because what this is now doing is it's reconnecting paid, owned, and earned media more closely to customer experience, so that now with agentic, you can actually leverage the insights from your CX to better improve the targeting of your advertising and the content creation of your advertising. And then you can leverage all the data signals that you use to orchestrate your CX those data signals are actually can be used to optimize your media too. So what agentic is actually, it's dramatically changing the value chain in a way that brings advertising closer to CX is my view. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic, because ultimately I think it'll it'll challenge us on answering the question, where are we creating these expectations with our customers? And so I'll start with that. And the way that I think about this is, customers, they don't experience your brand through those specific boundaries, right? If it's paid or owned or earned. It's not like I'm going to go look for a new product as a customer and say, okay, am I going to go into their paid channel, their own channel, or their earned channel? Like, quite frankly, I'm just going to go into a channel that I am comfortable with. And I experience the brand through that specific channel. I might go online, I might go in store, I might even shop on their, see something TikTok, whatever it may be. But ultimately, I see one brand, one promise. I see my own journey, right? Although my journey is probably all over different channels, I only see my own journey. And so when I think about those set of expectations that are being created, well, are they being fulfilled or are they broken? And if you think about AI now starting to blur all those boundaries because it's really allowing a brand to connect what you were saying, intent, interaction, and response time all in real time. And so, for example, like paid ad creates the promise. If I'm shopping on the website or the app or the store, they either fulfill or break that promise.
Well, let's take a few really fun examples of this and bring this to life. If you humor me, we're now not that far in the future because this is happening really fast.
Yeah.
And you're shopping and you're doing stuff inside, pick your favorite interface, your surface. It could be ChatGPT, it could be Claude, it could be Gemini, it could be Sparky from Walmart, it could be whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an agentic interface and there's far less time going to websites. So a lot of the time that's been spent like designing, UX, UI and designing websites needs to be rethought because humans are not going to the site as much anymore. It's a bot going to the site and you're interacting inside. So search has changed and the digital shelf is come closer to the couch. You're now interacting with a bot or your shopping bot is interacting with the bot also is another possibility. So in that context, the customer experience and advertising have completely converged because you're integrating advertising into a shopping bot experience that is a customer experience.
Absolutely. I'll give you a great example of this. So, um, over Christmas, so my 17-year-old, 13-year-old, they love, of course, taking pictures of our pets and putting them on ChatGPT and asking them to put different outfits on them and stuff. And so my we were getting ready to decorate the house for Christmas, and our girls wanted to do something completely different. So Matthew, they walked out to the front yard, they took a picture of the house, they uploaded it into ChatGPT and said, hey, we're thinking basically give us 3 different types of styles of decorations. ChatGPT sent back images that were, I mean, it looked like our house and different kind of ways to think about decorating it. And then they picked out whatever image it was. And they said, okay, where can I find all of these lights to buy? And within a matter of a couple minutes, ChatGPT sent back links to Amazon and to Walmart and then to Home Depot. And quite frankly, it was the entire shopping list.
20 years ago, I used to do work in the shopper marketing space, which was like how consumers in shopping mode are behaving differently. And so I was involved in authoring the shopper marketing 3.0, 4.0, 5.0 reports with the Consumer Brand Association, then the GMA. I wrote those. And then was on the Google Shopper Council and did a lot of work with clients, helping them reimagine how brands collaborate with retailers or how retailers collaborate with brands. as this went digital. But in this world back then, we still had more separation between media, in-store activation, e-commerce. There were different disciplines that needed to be coordinated. What you're describing now is the shopper solution is not the shopper solution is not a display event in the store. The shopper solution is the way you interact with the bot.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about the repercussions of that, right? If I'm a retailer, that means I can no longer just optimize for acquisition efficiency, right? CX is no longer just about post-sale sentiment, and product is no longer just about expectation setting. Now they're all interconnected through ChatGPT, for example, and it's going to be the same thing that agents will be able to do. And so when you think about that world of paid, owned, and earned, now they're not separate channels anymore. They're starting to become interconnected experience signals. And that's, to me, that's really powerful because you see them as one system. You can design for consistency, not just a specific campaign performance. And now to your point that you made a couple of minutes ago about the standard of experience is being raised, this is how it's being raised and how organizations need to be thinking about. I don't just think about it as experience design anymore. I think about it as performance design.
Well, let's take, I like to think of um, customer experiences connected to particular use cases. In your book, those would be basically your one-page value experiences, the frictions that you want to remove. So like it could be an e-commerce use case, it could be a loyalty app use case, it could be a customer service use case, whatever. It could be, a marketing acquisition use case. All of these are opportunities, and if you follow the logic of what we're saying, any one of those could create a friction point in the CX where there's something happening in the conversion to, like, let's say you're using performance marketing to drive somebody into an agentic experience and that's replacing your website that people can now converse with the brand. Well, where does it break down from the performance marketing to conversion? What's happening that causes the friction to occur that you then solve for over your sprints? In that world, CX is not some separate listening function that comes back and does listening after the fact. It's part of designing the actual UX.
Yeah. Yeah, it really and to your point, right? It's designing the UX, but ultimately at the end of the day, what we really become is operational performance drivers, right? It doesn't matter if it's through marketing or what it may be around the organization, but to your point, now we got to be thinking about it from a UX piece. I think what's happened too is um, I think experience design has become one of those skill sets that have just become lost, right? And so what's happening is organizations are designing these new experiences, whether it's in marketing, and they're very siloed because we all operate independently. And so all this unintended friction has hit your organization, and it's not done purposefully, right? It's just the lost art of experience design. And most of the companies that I've worked with, Matthew, now over the last year, when you think about friction, it's not just a one-time event. It's a compounding effect over time. And so when I look at, for example, if you just take one customer signal, which is customer sentiment, if I ask them to look at their sentiment heat map over the last 12 months, the things that were causing frustration 12 months ago are the same frictions that are happening today. And so when you think about that 12-month compounding effect, and we're not even talking operational or behavioral drag, we're just talking about sentiment drag. Organizations now are spending more in compounding friction than they are in customer acquisition costs.
People should definitely pick up the book and read it. I think we're hitting on some of the themes in the book here. Um, to kind of recap it a little bit, and then we'll go into the next question, is like what we're talking about, Zach, is that a CX leader should collaborate internally to take all the signals and identify what are the friction points and prioritize them. This is what you write about in the book. And in a good project, whatever name you have on it, return on experience or some other consulting name, this is what you're doing. You're taking insights, you're engaging people in the organization, you're prioritizing where you're going to create value, you're making sure they're internal owners, product owners effectively, and then you're changing the way work done to work in pods over sprints to go after, and then you're creating a repeatable system where the people who you're partnering with benefit, they share the outcome, and the system scales because you overcome the internal friction in politics because of the way you build alignment. Your book is a masterclass for how to build internal alignment and get buy-in and drive a scalable performance. In fact, if people follow the roadmap in the book, they don't need $1 million consulting projects.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it really is how I learned to influence from prioritization. So I'll tell the story really quickly. When I went to my first prioritization session, again, it was just with a lot of insights. And everyone was like, look, these are really good insights. Let's continue to track them. Everyone's heard that. But then when I sat back and started to observe what are those unwritten rules in prioritization and at my organization I just didn't know about. And everyone was coming with that one-page business case. And ultimately what they were doing was they were forcing a decision. Now, the decision might not always go in their way where that initiative got prioritized, but they were also presenting the trade-off to our executive leadership team of, if we don't prioritize this, you are happy and okay with the cost of inaction, essentially, right? So my second prioritization I went to, Matthew, I had a business case, and the exec team was like, "This is incredible," and it was all about our cart abandonment rate. And our e-commerce leader, Manjush at the time, was like, "Zach, this is great, but this is the first time I'm seeing this. So I can't commit to it until you walk me through how you derive this, essentially." And that was kind of like the second law of prioritization I learned. And the third one, so then I learned, okay, co-create the one-page business case with my cross-functional partners. And now they're going in to prioritization and fighting for that friction that's blocking their KPI. And so I made it about them. It was their KPIs that they're held accountable to, that if they don't hit, they could potentially lose their job. And so how do I frame customer friction into a business problem that they could understand?
Yeah, and people embrace what they help create. So if you don't involve the stakeholders who are going to own the outcome in the creation of the process, you're just unnecessarily. Um, Someone once we did a change management workshop, and where we pick cards off a table, and people get to say which card resonates with them. And someone at the client, this was a pet food client, right? Um, they picked up a picture of a gun, like a revolver. You probably wouldn't use that in a session these days, right? But he picked up the card. It was one of the 52 cards. And we said to him, like, why did you pick that card up? And he said, it's not that we shoot ourselves in the foot, it's how fast we reload.
Yeah, I look, I think the key metric now for experienced leaders is decision velocity. How fast are you driving decisions inside your organization? And then from the moment they get prioritized, how long is it till the first action, right? So to you deploy and you have that first experience. And, it goes back to what you were just saying. It's not about the decision that's getting made, but it's about how quickly are we driving those decisions.
Or in the case of this company, how often they were repeating the insanity. They were making bad decisions and doing them over and over again.
That's true too, right? I mean, it's the classic definition of insanity. I mean, it's, um, but I think many organizations are there.
They can unblock it. I mean, rather than like continually bringing insights to the table and then have perpetual discussion, like insights theater, like you said, you can actually frame it as friction points, decisions to be made, and then show measurable progress. In fact, a lot of decisions don't need to be made in a council if the sprint teams are empowered and have the right product sponsorship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that piece, yes, I agree with you. We could take this different approach, but I think too many CXers today has taken that victim approach of, well, my leadership team, they just don't care about customers. And that's total BS because they do care about the customers. And quite frankly, they just need you to connect the dots to show them, okay, what does this emotion mean? What does this sentiment mean? How is it impacting our P&L? Right. And so for us, that is advocating for your customers. Being the translator is advocating.
Unless you bring the data and the decision framed in a way the organization can act, then wringing your hands that the organization doesn't act is a bit like, well, why are you surprised if like you're expecting the organization to do a backflip? Like you meet it where it is a little bit more, and share data in a way that it's able to act.
Yeah, but I think we're seeing the repercussions of this now, right? Where unfortunately too many CX budgets are getting significantly cut. They have for the last several years. Professionals are losing their jobs, and it's not that the execs don't care. They did. That's why you had a job. That's why you had a team. That's why you had a multi-million dollar platform. You just never brought receipt.
It's a bit of half full, half empty to bring it back to that. And I don't want to sound like unsympathetic, but CX leaders who are able to partner with others in the organization, and yes, it matters to have good sponsorship, but I often don't think the problem is lack of sponsorship. If the CX leader repeats the old stuff over and over again of insights theater, of bringing dashboards, of bringing reports, and is not seen as a partner to making tough trade-offs, to making decisions, to driving the orchestration, if they're not learning new skills around data and analytics and agentic and other things, then what's going to happen is that you end up with a whipsaw effect where the CX gets absorbed into tech or absorbed into analytics somewhere else, because they're like, well, and then you end up with an overshoot effect where what ends up happening is they end up like overly focusing on cost reduction in the call center, or focusing this as an automation cost reduction challenge where CX, it becomes basically a focus on removing cost from the organization. And so we've overshot now in the other direction, but that occurred because a vacuum was left where CX was not actually a partner to their positive change.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get the CXers who say, "Well, we just need authority to make decisions," and that's not the answer to it either, right? If you really think about it, if we want that authority, then what P&L outcome are you going to own? And I think what's happened in CX, and I wrote about this a couple weeks ago, is there's two words that became really dirty in our discipline, which was accountability and performance. And somewhere along the way, we created ourselves as these like sentiment martyrs, and we're all about human connection and emotion, and all that is great. It's not that I don't believe in it, but at the end of the day, you have to drive a business outcome. You have to deliver value back to your organization.
This, by the way, the same thing is true in the UX UI profession now with AI. It's if you have these priesthoods or these clubs that emerge that they say, hey, we are the arbiters of what good design is, or what good CX is, or what good insights are, but they don't want to be accountable, and they don't want to they don't want to play by the same rules as everyone else. Then eventually they get cut.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we're seeing that, right? And I think this is the new reality being set of, I'm even, I see so many folks out there struggling to get new roles, and that's because they're showing up and they're still talking about insights and NPS versus, look, anytime anyone asks me what I do, it's like I do three things. I help you increase revenue, reduce customer churn, and protect you from compliance and risk issues. That's how I described my role when I was at Aaron's. And my CEO just looked at me like, oh, okay, this is different.
And that's how customer experience leads to value. Right. So, unfortunately, we're going to run out of time. I mean, I suppose in a podcast we could keep going forever, but we'll lose people. Will click out. Last couple minutes, Zach. Do you have any other thoughts you want to share to, CX leaders or executives who sponsor teams? Like, given what we've talked about, what are some things that people can take away, can go apply in their work, other than taking the action to buy your book and read it?
I appreciate that. Look, there's a couple questions that I always start with when I start with a new engagement. So when I meet with a CEO, so if a CEO is listening, one of the questions I'll ask is, what is one customer friction you've prioritized in the last 90 days? And typically it's really, really silent. And then when I start meeting with the CX team, it's look, let's just go look at your friction drag, that one heat map, right? Okay, great. Let's just pick 5 frictions and let's just frame them into a business problem. And then the second thing to do is after you frame them into a business problem, then reach out to that cross-functional partner whose KPI is being impacted and just say, hey, Matthew, look, I know you and the team are working really, really hard on this specific KPI. I think I've spotted 2 customer frictions that's having a significant impact. Is it worth 15 minutes to connect? And let me show you what I found. And that's it. And then that's the start of, start small. I mean, I shared the other day, I think the very first friction we solved at Aaron's yielded an R in your term, an ROX of $100,000. Wasn't much, wasn't something significant, but it's something the organization had never seen
But
before.
it's the start of a self-funding
And it
flywheel.
was the start of the flywheel because then it became, oh, well, we just worked 2 weeks on that. That was 100K. Well, what else could you find? And
Yeah,
then the
what if
flywheel just started.
if you think like an agile professional, if you have a backlog of 20, 30 frictions you're working on over the course of a year or 2, that's real
Yeah.
money.
Yeah. And then the last point I would say is I know a lot of folks are still trying to figure out, what's the ROI that we've got on our platform spend last year, for example. And so the way that I just start is write down every single customer friction that got resolved last year. Just start with that. And then based on the time that you redeployed that new experience or new policy or new training or whatever it may be, then look at the customer behavior change and what happened after that, even if it's just trailing 6 months. What was that new behavior that changed, whether it was positive or negative? And then what was the financial impact of that? And that's going to be a reality check, Matthew, because most brands that I work with, they can't even name a specific friction that got prioritized. Typically, we roll out a report.
You mentioned, I think it was 120,000,000 at Aaron's, like, you know, I've seen this movie with strong CX leaders, like you were in that seat, where we partner with them on, like, building out not just the roadmap, but, like, the change management and culture to make this a performance system, like you say. Often the benefits are over $100,000,000. Like, and then this is stuff the CFO buys into, but you only get there if it becomes a scalable system versus a one-off project.
Yeah, you start small and then you scale it. And I think, look, I think that's the key is also understanding where's your organization. I've seen too many CX leaders who come in and pitch 12, 18, 24-month transformation initiatives when their CEO is just fighting for their job and they're looking for anything that can deliver value this quarter or
The best clients I've worked with have not actually bought the work as like a 18 to 24-month program. It's been a series, old adage, you score more runs with singles than home runs. Like it's actually a string of 10 or 20 projects, not one massive project that gets you more change.
absolutely, absolutely. And I'll finish with this story because I know we're wrapping up. I was working with a footwear retailer last year, and they had payment errors that were popping up. And every month they were talking to the executive leadership team of customers are still really frustrated with our payment process. They're getting these errors. And of course, it was just continue to monitor, right? I just took that simple payment error when I started to work with them, framed it up. It was actually a $50 million problem over 12 months. And we're sitting in the room with the CEO, and she's like, why hasn't anyone brought this to me? And the CX leader's like, well, I have. And she's like, I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. And then she turned to the CTO and was like, how much is this going to cost to fix? And he's like, probably about 30 to 50K. She's like, I would have given you $5 million to fix this. And so to your point of just those singles and doubles, like it wasn't anything massive. It was just we reframed it.
Yeah. It's a a great insight can unlock a lot of value. By the way, the name JourneySpark is to spark ideas and energy. Like one spark can lead to a significant journey.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Hey, Zach, I really had a lot of fun, and thanks for coming on the show. And I really enjoyed your book. And folks should definitely check out the review, check out the book, and if people want to reach out, what's the best way to find you? Is over LinkedIn or something else?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Just find me on LinkedIn. I'm there every day. I enjoy conversation. I enjoy debates. I definitely get into debates, into conversation as well. So
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation. And thanks again for coming on.
yeah, thanks for having me.